Hello friends, Steve the Math Buddha here, and today we're going to be looking at part 1 of my review of the #1 most robust math topic that I found on the SATs. And that's the topic of slope and how many solutions to a pair of linear equations. We're going to be looking at actual SAT questions, and we're going to be getting a really good handle on what questions are being asked and how the questions are being phrased. My goal for this video is to prepare you for anything that the college boards might throw at you on today's topic. And you know what? If after watching today's video, you still have any problems with any of the SAT questions being asked on the topic of slope, please let me know in the comments or reach out to me at stevethemathbuddha@gmail.com. And I will do my best to resolve any issues that you might have. Now, as I have pointed out, the slope how many solutions topic was particularly robust, which is why I'm going to have to teach it in 2 parts. Today, in part 1, I'm going to introduce you to the concept of slope, and I'm going to show you how to find it in a graphed line or the equation for a line. Next week, in part 2, we're going to be looking at how we could use this concept of slope to determine how many solutions there are to a pair of linear equations. Now, before we go on, let's take a look at all the SAT questions that I found on today's topic. Note that the questions highlighted in yellow pertain to the concepts that we're going to be learning today. The other questions are associated with the concepts that we're going to be learning next week in part 2. And you can access all these questions because I have in the description below a link to the site where I found all these SATs. Now, today's topic is one of the top 20 math topics that I will be covering in my upcoming SAT prep series. If you want to see what the other 19 topics are and the related SAT questions that I found on those topics, please refer to my 2-part introductory video. You will find a link to those videos in the description below. Now, for today's lesson, let's start with a definition of the word slope. The slope of a line on the XY coordinate plane is a measure of its steepness. It's defined as rise over run or change in y over change in x. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to find the slope from a graph, or from an equation of the form y equals mx plus b, or from an equation of the form ax plus by equals c. I'm also going to talk about finding the slope of a parallel line or a perpendicular line. So let's get to it. So let's take a look at this concept on an actual graph. And this is an actual question from the October 2020 SATs. It's question 433. And this is a common problem that you're going to see on the SAT where they ask you to identify the slope of a line from the graph. And the way we handle this problem is we have to identify 2 definite points on the graph. And as you can see, we have those 2 points highlighted. We have the point 25 and the point -2, -1. And what we have to do is we have to subtract the coordinates of one of those points from the coordinates of the other point and plug them into our formula. So we start with the change in y. We get that by subtracting the -1 from the 5, and that goes into our numerator, like so. For our change in x, we have to subtract our -2 from our 2, and that goes in our denominator. Now, we could switch it around and subtract the coordinates of the upper point from the coordinates of the lower point, in which case it would look like this. But as you can see, that doesn't change our result, because on the top fraction, we end up having 5 minus -1. The negatives cancel, so we have 5 plus 1 equals 6. And in the denominator, again, the negatives cancel, and we get 2 plus 2 equals 4. Now, in the lower fraction, what we have is -1 minus 5 is -6 on the top, and -2 minus 2 is -4 in the denominator. So it's the same. The numerator of the lower fraction is the negative of the numerator in the upper fraction, and the denominator of the lower fraction is the negative of the denominator in the upper fraction. So the negatives will cancel, and in either case, we're left with 6/4, or 3/2, or 1/2. And any of those answers will suffice. This is question 433, so we have to put the answer in the grid. 6/4, 3/2, 1.5, all those things are going to work. You cannot enter any negatives in the grid, though. None of the numbers can be negative. So -6 divided by -4 is not going to work. Okay, so what if they don't show us a graph? What if they give us an equation and they ask us to find the slope from the equation? What we're going to do today is we're going to look at 2 basic types of linear equations. We're going to look at the y equals mx plus b form, and we're also going to look at the ax plus by equals c form. Now for the first case, as you might recall, when we have the linear equation in the form y equals mx plus b, it's really easy to find the slope. It's just m. It's just the coefficient of x. And I do want to point out, in the question that we looked at earlier on the graph, they did not ask what is the slope of the line in this graph. What they said was the line in this graph is represented by the equation y equals mx plus b. What is m? Which is the same thing as asking what is the slope. So let's start by examining this y equals mx plus b form. And let's do it by looking at another actual SAT question. Hey folks, gotta take this time to remind you to please like, share, and subscribe. And also, as usual, I gotta plug the artist that created the design for this t-shirt. I love him. The link to his Fiverr page is in the description below, as usual. That's for original designs only. Math Buddha t-shirts are not yet for sale. And for all your printing needs, I also have a link to the Zazzle site where I had the t-shirt printed. If you're going to buy anything at either one of those sites, please use my links because it helps to support this channel. And Lord knows I need all the support that I can get. And with that, let's get back to our show. Here's a question from the October 2021 exam. It's question 316. The graph of y equals 3/5 x minus 8 is a line in the xy plane. What is the slope of this line? Well, again, when the equation is in this form, it's really easy to find the slope. We just pluck it right out of the equation. It's the coefficient of x, or 3/5. So what if they asked what is the slope of a line parallel to this line? Well, the answer is the same, 3/5. Parallel lines have the same steepness. The slopes are always the same. So what if they asked what is the slope of a line that's perpendicular to this line? Well, perpendicular lines have slopes that are negative reciprocals of each other. In order to find the slope of the perpendicular, what we have to do is invert the 3/5 and change the sign. So it's going to be negative 5/3. The slope of the perpendicular is negative 5/3. Now, one of the things they might do is give you a set of equations and ask you which equation represents a perpendicular line to this line in the xy plane. Here's an example. So, suppose they give us these four equations and they ask us which one is the equation for the line that's perpendicular to our original line, y equals 3/5 x minus 8. Now, we've already determined that the perpendicular to our line must have a slope of negative 5/3, so we have to determine which one of these equations is the equation for a line with the slope of negative 5/3. And B is the correct answer. Now we're hiding it a little bit here because equation B does not have the form y equals mx plus b. But you know what? They do that on the SATs. They like to play with the form to make the questions a little bit harder. But it's pretty clear here that x is in fact being multiplied by negative 10 and being divided by 6. So is the 12 being multiplied by negative 10 and being divided by 6. But we don't care about the constant term. We don't care about b. We only care about m. And m is the coefficient of x, which is clearly minus 10 over 6, which is the same as minus 5 over 3. We just divide the top and bottom by 2. So that's our answer, folks. B is the answer to this question. And now it's time to move on to ax plus by equals c. Now for the ax plus by equals c case, what we're going to do is we're going to manipulate the equation to get it in the form y equals mx plus b. We're going to do that just once, just to find the formula for the slope. And once we have that formula, we can just put that in the back of our minds and use it on the exam. So how do we do that? Well, we have to get the x over to the right side, so let's subtract ax from both sides of this equation. It's going to give us this. Now the next thing that we have to do is we have to isolate the y on the left-hand side of this equation. And in order to do that, we have to divide the entire equation by b. And that gives us this. So now that we have it in this form, it's easy to find the slope. We just pull it right out of the equation. It's the coefficient of x. It's negative a over b, or the negative of the coefficient of x divided by the coefficient of y from our original equation. And of course, the slope of any parallel line would also have to be negative a over b, and the slope of a perpendicular line would have to be b over a, or the coefficient of y over the coefficient of x. So here's a question from the May 2022 US exam, question 318. And by the way, there is a link in the description to the site where I found these SATs, so you all can find these questions the same as I did. So the question works like this. Suppose we have a line P given by the equation 2x plus 4y equals 9. And suppose the line R is perpendicular to the line P in the xy plane. What is the slope of line R? Well, again, the slope of the perpendicular is simply the coefficient of y divided by the coefficient of x. So it's going to be 4 over 2 or 2. But what if you had to spot the equation for the perpendicular, and what if the equations were all in the form ax plus by equals c? Could we do it then? Well, let's take a look. So we have to determine which one of these equations has the slope we need. And we're looking for a slope of 4 over 2 equals 2. And we have to get it from the negative of the coefficient of x divided by the coefficient of y. And that's going to be d. The coefficient of x is minus 8. The coefficient of y is 4. Minus 8 over 4 is negative 2. And if we take the negative of that, we get the 2 that we need. So that concludes my first SAT prep video. That's topic 1, part 1. And let me remind you of the questions that I found on this topic. Again, questions pertaining to this week's video are highlighted in yellow. The other questions will be covered in part 2, which will be released a week from tonight. And again, you can find all these SATs at the link in the description below. And with that, let's take a look at last week's error challenge. Last week, I left you with the following error challenge. For this week's challenge, guess what? I did it again. There is a point in this video where the text changes. Let me know if you see it. So where is this changing text? Well, this time it's in our first section, topic number 10. And once again, the slash is the big giveaway. See how the slash is pointing up to the A? Now let's see what it looks like at the 2-minute mark. And now the slash is pointing up to the I. And now let's jump ahead to 2:10. And once again, the slash is pointing up to the A. So that's the mistake that I made in last week's video. Now what about this week? This week we have another changing text situation. This is a common theme because after editing and reviewing my videos, if I see a mistake, I have to go back and fix it. And I've probably erased over it at that point because I'm doing lots of scenes in these videos, which means I have to rewrite it. So these kind of mistakes are going to happen all the time. Let me know in the comments if you noticed this one. And that's all I have for you folks today. Have a great night, and I hope to see you for part 2 next week. This is the Math Buddha signing off again. Have a great night and have a truly pleasant tomorrow.